Brother made my life hell, later found out he got my wife pregnant, and our son wasn't mine. Now he's crawling back after our parents disowned him, and left me their $2 million inheritance. I have a younger brother, Caleb, who has despised me for as long as I can remember. If you think it was jealousy, that's not the case. I wasn't the favored child. He was. So he had no reason to feel that way. For context, my mom has always pampered him. He was the golden child in our family. She would cook his meals, do his laundry, and even ask me to help with his schoolwork. I was expected to assist simply because he was family, but that same courtesy was never shown to me. I eventually accepted it, as I was quite independent. Maybe part of the problem was that I kept accommodating his needs without expecting anything in return. He never helped me when I needed it and only reached out when he wanted something. I was a quiet, introverted kid who preferred studying and keeping to myself, while he was more like our dad, loud and rough. I've always been straightforward and honest, not one to sugarcoat things. Because of that, I think my mom developed a negative perception of me over time. As a result, he remained everyone's favorite. That didn't bother me much growing up. The real issues started when he began bullying and mocking me for being different. He would make fun of my height and the fact that I wore glasses. He would sneak into my room and read my diary, then complain to my mom about whatever he found. Whenever I confronted him or told my parents, they would laugh it off and say it wasn't a big deal. He did worse things too, like almost breaking my glasses and putting disgusting things in my food. Once, he even put small stones in my cereal, but I noticed before I could get hurt. I told my mom, but she dismissed it, saying this is how brothers bond. Whenever we argued, he would deliberately target my insecurities. Since we went to the same school, he knew I was being bullied by other kids, yet instead of supporting me, he sided with them. He joined in calling me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey, and even encouraged them to hurt me physically, saying I was just a failure. One time, during an argument, probably over something minor, he told me to kill myself. I could brush off most insults, but that one stuck with me because I was already struggling with my mental health at the time. I'm doing better now, but hearing that from my own brother hurt deeply. My dad was often at work, and my mom didn't seem to care much. She even blamed me once, saying I provoked him. Things kept getting worse. At one point in high school, he even tried to burn my hair, and unbelievably, my mom defended him again, saying he was just playing. Who plays like that? Thankfully, my dad eventually stepped in. He called Caleb out and made it clear that his behavior was unacceptable. He even threatened to call the police. It was a shock to Caleb, as he had never faced real consequences before. My dad told him he needed to grow up and start respecting me. Later, my dad came to my room and talked to me. I hadn't expected him to take my side, especially since he always said Caleb was just like him. He admitted he had been waiting for Caleb to mature, thinking it was just immaturity, but now realized he had become a bully. Hearing that made me feel validated, and I almost broke down. I told my dad everything Caleb had done over the years, and also opened up about the bullying at school. He was shocked I had been dealing with so much. The next day, he spoke to the school principal to make sure the bullying would stop. That evening, he enrolled me in MMA at a local gym. He told me I needed to stand up for myself. I'll admit, seeing a nerdy kid like me trying to learn how to fight must have looked ridiculous. But like everything else in my life, I approached it with focus and determination. Whenever I wanted to learn something, I made time for it. I set aside hours from my studies so I could work out every day and attend MMA classes. Not to brag, but it completely transformed both my life and my physique. One day, Caleb was at it again. He had stolen my pocket money, the same money we received for helping with chores. I had been saving mine for quite a while. He had sneaked into my room and taken it. I caught him just as he was about to ride off on his bike with his friends. I firmly told him to give it back, reminding him that stealing was wrong. Caleb just snickered and mocked me, saying all I could do was run to Dad for help. I don't know what came over me, but I punched him hard in the face. He stood there in stunned silence before falling backward onto the ground. I picked him up, took my money out of his pocket, and then threw him back down. He started crying loudly, like a little kid. It was almost comical to see a teenage boy crying on the ground. My mom came rushing out when she heard him, helping him up and asking what had happened. When she found out I had hit him, she was shocked and immediately began scolding me. She said that as the older brother, I should be setting a better example. Meanwhile, Caleb seemed to enjoy watching me get reprimanded. My mom also complained to my dad, saying I had beaten Caleb up and needed to be controlled. My dad asked both of us to explain what had happened. I told him Caleb had stolen the money I had worked hard to save. Caleb tried to justify himself by saying he needed it for a date, and that, as his brother, I should have helped him. My dad told him he was lucky I had only punched him, because anyone else might have called the police. He went on to say Caleb had no right to take someone else's belongings without permission. Caleb didn't like that and started throwing a tantrum, likely expecting our mom to defend him. But Dad stayed firm. When Caleb realized I wasn't going to be punished, he shouted about how much he hated me before running to his room and locking himself inside. After that incident, Caleb kept his distance. He finally understood that he couldn't bully me anymore, and even Dad wasn't supporting his behavior. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were equals. Even though he could no longer hurt me physically, he would still try to insult me whenever our parents weren't around. As he got older, it only got worse. Each year he seemed angrier and more short-tempered. If I tried to talk to him, he would ignore me and walk away, muttering insults like nerd or loser under his breath. If he needed something, he would go through our mom instead of speaking to me directly. I would ask her why he couldn't just talk to me, and she would tell me to be more understanding. I didn't know if it was just a phase, or if he genuinely hated me. I used to tolerate his behavior, but eventually, I reached a point where I just wanted to move out to get away from him. I repeatedly asked my mom to help arrange a conversation so we could talk things out, but she always refused, saying she didn't want to get involved. Even when I asked for her opinion on why he treated me that way, she would brush it off. Eventually, I got accepted into my dream university. I had excellent grades and even earned a scholarship. My dad threw a party for me, and my mom made proud as well. Caleb, however, remained distant and barely acknowledged my achievements. The day I left for university was a mix of excited and relief, excited for what lay ahead, and relieved to escape the toxic environment at home. The first few months were liberating. I made new friends, enjoyed my classes, and began building a life away from everything I had experienced growing up. The constant fear of Caleb's verbal attacks disappeared, and I finally felt at peace. In my second year, I started dating my wife Karen. A friend introduced us at a frat party, and we connected instantly. Coming from a religious family, having children outside of marriage was not acceptable. During our final year, we found out she was pregnant, which led us to get married soon after graduation. Our wedding was small, but peaceful. Our parents were happy for us, and we genuinely enjoyed the day. At that time, I truly believed she was the love of my life. I had always wanted a monogamous life, one woman to come home to and share everything with for the long term, despite other women trying to pursue me over the years. I never pursued anything because I was genuinely content in my marriage. Karen was my dream girl, and I never wanted to hurt her. However, over the years, there were two occasions when I discovered she had been unfaithful. One was an on and off affair that lasted a few years with her married coworker, and the other was a fling with an ex she had dated in high school when she went to visit her family in another state. I'm sure some people would call me foolish, and looking back, I can't really deny it. After a period of separation in both situations, I chose to forgive her. I never wanted my child to grow up in a broken home, and I genuinely believed we could overcome it. We were quite young when the situation with her coworker happened, so I chalked it up to immaturity, and poor judgment. For a while, things seemed okay between us. I could never fully trust her again, but I tried to push aside my doubts because I knew that if I chose forgiveness, I had to work toward moving on and starting fresh. It has been 4 years since the second incident, and I felt like I had made the right decision by giving her another chance. Over time, Karen appeared to have changed, and we were genuinely happy, making plans for our future as a family. However, 3 months ago, my reality was shattered again by something far worse than anything before. She revealed that she had been sleeping with someone for quite some time and suggested that our son might not even be mine. Hearing that felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I was overwhelmed by shock, betrayal, and disbelief, struggling to process what she had just told me. After some time, I managed to ask why she had kept something so significant from me and how she could do something so devastating. Her response was cold and indifferent. She seemed detached, almost unaffected by the pain she had caused. Her answers were vague, leaving me with more questions than clarity. It was a surreal and deeply painful moment, confronting the broken trust and the uncertainty surrounding my own family. I kept asking her to tell me the truth, because I felt I deserved to know who the father of the child was, especially since I had been raising our son from the very beginning. Eventually, she admitted it was Caleb. My eyes widened in shock as I asked her what she meant. That's when Karen explained how she and Caleb had become friends back when I introduced her to my family during Thanksgiving, when she stayed with us through New Year's. I remembered how Caleb, who was usually cold toward me, had been surprisingly polite and warm to her. I was actually glad because I didn't want Karen to feel unwelcome. She wanted to be accepted into my family, so she spent a lot of time with my mom whenever she could. She noticed that Caleb and I weren't close and asked me about it. I eventually opened up to her about my childhood and how strained my relationship with Caleb was and how I didn't think it could ever be repaired. She understood, but she started including Caleb whenever we went out, perhaps hoping we might grow closer. If we planned to watch a movie, she would invite Caleb, and we'd end up watching whatever he chose. I do remember that during that time, Caleb and I exchanged a few words here and there, which was already an improvement compared to the years of silence. Karen and Caleb would sometimes hang out and play video games together, but I never thought much of it. Karen told me that one day, Caleb opened up to her about his struggles and his recent breakup with his ex-girlfriend. He seemed vulnerable, and they formed a connection. She said he would sometimes flirt with her when I wasn't around, and eventually, things escalated, and she claimed she couldn't control herself. I closed my eyes, as the image of my wife and my brother together made me feel sick. She said she felt guilty afterward, and distanced herself from him. Shortly after, she decided to go back home, which I remembered clearly. At the time, she had abruptly told me she wanted to leave, even though I thought she would stay through New Year's. I tried to convince her to stay, but she insisted on going. I was the more dependable brother, so she chose to stay with me, which is why we got married. It felt like my entire world was collapsing. The son I had loved and spent countless hours raising might not even be mine. I asked her if she was still involved with Caleb, and she slowly nodded. Karen told me that she and Caleb had always stayed in touch because their chemistry was undeniable. They would sneak off to hotels while she told me she was working overtime. She admitted that many of her business trips were actually romantic getaways with him. I asked her why she had married me if she truly wanted my brother. She said she didn't want to be the one to end a marriage, and since I was such a good father to our son, she stayed. In her words, she made a mistake and didn't know when to stop. I simply told her I was glad she had finally told me the truth, and that I was going to pack my things and leave. Karen began crying, asking for forgiveness, saying I was supposed to yell at her, but instead I was calmly thinking about my next move. I said nothing as I went to my cupboard and started packing clothes into my suitcase. She kept insisting that if I truly loved her, I should fight for the marriage, that mistakes happen in every relationship. When she realized I wasn't reacting, she changed her approach and said our son would suffer if we divorced, that children shouldn't grow up in a broken home. I reminded her that I might not even be his father, which reduced her to tears. She then accused me of being cruel, saying I could walk away so easily after being there for the child since birth. It seemed like she believed nothing could push me to leave. Maybe that was partly my fault for letting so much slide in the past. While I did have feelings for her, it felt more tied to the life we had built, and the belief that we shared a child. Having been together since college, Karen kept saying it wasn't too late and that we could fix things, but I couldn't believe her anymore. I had no patience left. Trust had always been important to me, and her words meant nothing now. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget that she had been with my own brother. I've always believed people can make mistakes and deserve forgiveness, but this crossed a line. I left her crying at the doorstep and checked into a hotel. The next day, I went straight to my parents and told them everything about her affair with Caleb and how it had been going on for years behind my back. The shock on their faces was clear. My mother, true to form, initially defended Caleb, insisting it couldn't be true because her son would never do something like that. Determined to prove the truth, I asked my parents to stay quiet while I called Caleb in front of them. I told them not to make a sound so he would think it was just a private conversation and let his guard down. When he picked up, I confronted him directly about his affair with my wife. At first, he denied everything and refused to admit it. But when I told him Karen had already confessed, he began blaming her, calling her characterless. He said it wasn't his fault if women were attracted to him, and claimed he was the better-looking brother. I told him I would expose him to everyone. He mocked me, saying no one would believe me and that he was still the golden child. I scoffed at his arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth, since our parents had heard everything. He went silent, then began stumbling over his words, trying to explain himself and salvage his image. My mother, still in shock, demanded an explanation from him. He stuttered, attempting to justify his actions, blaming everyone but himself, and trying to shift the responsibility onto Karen. I could see that my mother, who had always protected him, was now overwhelmed with disappointment and anger in that moment. I felt a strange sense of vindication. For years, I had endured Caleb's torment, and now the truth had come to light. The roles were reversed. It was Caleb who stood exposed, his actions laid bare for everyone to see. As his words began to falter, my father, usually reserved in his emotions, could no longer contain his disappointment. He asked me to hand in the phone and went off on Caleb. Caleb, he began, his tone heavy with disapproval. What you have done is not just a betrayal of your brother, but a betrayal of his family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued even after they were married. Your actions have consequences, and they have irreversibly damaged the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value family, loyalty, and decency. What you've shown today goes against everything I tried to instill in you." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The disregard for your brother's feelings, the lack of respect for the sanctity of his marriage, it's unacceptable. You've not only hurt him, but you have also damaged the bond that holds this family together. I feel like your mother and I are partly to blame for what you've become, but we will no longer allow this behavior to continue. Starting today, I am cutting you off from the college fund I set up for you. You can figure out your university fees on your own. I will no longer fund your lifestyle. You think it makes you more of a man to sleep with married women? Let's see what happens when you don't have my money to rely on." Throughout all of this, I remained composed. Although I initially wanted to scream at Caleb, watching my father hold him accountable felt like the ultimate vindication. I had exposed who he truly was, and it was clear he had underestimated the consequences. Caleb, still protesting, tried to justify himself, but my father quickly ended the call, shutting down any further attempts to excuse his actions. My mom then came over and hugged me. It had been a long time since we shared a moment like that, but in that embrace, there was a quiet sense of understanding and support. She apologized for not believing me all these years. I felt like my 14-year-old self would never have imagined this moment, being validated and embraced by my mother. After that, my dad helped me find a good lawyer so I could divorce Karen. She and her lawyer tried to play dirty by asking for alimony since I earned more than her, but her affair worked heavily in my favor. We also had a paternity test done for my son, and it confirmed that Caleb was indeed the father. I can't even begin to describe how painful it was to process that news. It hurt even more than when Karen admitted to cheating on me. I felt furious knowing the child I had raised wasn't mine. Still, I managed to stay strong through it all. Karen begged me to continue seeing the child, saying he shouldn't be punished for everything that had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. He reminded me of Caleb, and I hated that feeling. After the divorce was finalized and I was finally free, I moved into my own bachelor apartment. It felt surreal living alone since I had married young and never really experienced that independence. But I had always been self-reliant, so I adjusted quickly. And honestly, I loved it. 2 weeks ago, my dad called to tell me he had been thinking about changing his will. He didn't want to leave anything to, "Oh, Caleb." One thing about my dad is that when he makes a decision, he sticks to it. True to his word, he had cut Caleb off completely. Caleb tried reaching out to our parents, and even showed up at their house, begging for forgiveness, but they didn't even let him in. My mom, who used to give in to him, also seemed done with him, even though it must have been incredibly painful for her. Despite everything, Caleb never once reached out to me to apologize. It was clear he didn't regret what he had done. He was only upset about being cut off. My dad told me he planned to leave everything to me to prevent Caleb from contesting it later, leaving him with just $1. I was shocked. My dad had worked hard his entire life, and with his assets, retirement fund and life insurance, it all added up to nearly $2 million. The only condition in his will was that if he passed before my mom, she would continue living in the house, even though ownership would be in my name. Of course, I didn't mind that at all, since I would want to take care of my mom until her last days. Somehow, Caleb found out about all of this, and since he couldn't reach our parents, he called me yesterday, trying to fix things between us. He told me he was struggling to keep up with college, and that after Karen found out about the paternity of the child, she had been pressuring him for child support. He said he had no money, was looking for part-time jobs, and couldn't find anything. He begged me to talk to our family so we could start fresh, because he really needed my help. I laughed and told him I was done with him, and that he should have thought about all this before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. Caleb argued that I was being unfair and that she was also to blame, which I agreed with, reminding him that I had already divorced her. Now she was his responsibility, so he shouldn't be allowing me to complain about her or her child, since this was the result of his own actions. He started raising his voice, but I cut him off and reminded him that he was no longer the favored child, but the black sheep who had slept with his own brother's wife. At that point, Caleb began to cry and said that everyone, including our grandparents and relatives, had turned against him. That may have been true, but it was no longer my concern. I told him we were done and that he should never call me again, because he was no longer my brother. Since then, I've been replaying that conversation in my head. Even though I hate him, I hadn't heard him cry like that since we were kids. I won't lie, it did affect me a little, seeing him so helpless. That's why I'm here asking whether I should talk to our parents about him, or if I'd be wrong not to. Update 1. Hi everyone. Many of you have been asking why I'm no longer in contact with my son Henry, and some have called me cruel. I'm sorry, but I don't feel comfortable raising another man's child. This isn't a stepchild situation. I was led to believe he was my son, only to later find out he was actually my brother's child. Of course I was hurt, and I cried for days. The reason I don't want contact with Henry is because I don't want Karen back in my life. If I stay connected to her child, she will find a way back in, and I need my space. You can call me cruel or selfish, but I can't see him again, at least not for a very long time. Update 2. Most of you correctly guessed that it was my mother who told Caleb about my dad changing his will, and he called me as a last resort to fix things. I confronted her in front of my dad, and she broke down. She said I had punished Caleb enough, and that he had learned his lesson. My dad firmly told her that if she believed what Caleb did was forgivable, then he could no longer remain married to her, because he could never forgive that betrayal. His words silenced her. He made it clear that if she ever contacted Caleb again, and we found out, she would have to leave. Like I said, my dad is very stubborn. Hopefully my mom will learn from this. Update 3. It's been 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my parents has improved over the past couple of months. My dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he treats me more like a friend than a son. My mom, even though she misses Caleb, has stayed away from him. The last I heard about Caleb was from a cousin, who said he had been asking everyone for money, and eventually had to drop out of college because he couldn't afford the fees. He and Karen are living together now, and he works as a part-time mechanic. Apparently, they are raising Henry together, which I suppose is a good thing. I never bring up Caleb in conversations with my parents, and neither do they. As for me, I'm doing quite well. I was promoted at work 2 months ago, so my salary has improved significantly. I haven't been dating anyone yet, as I feel I still need time and space to heal. I've also started attending therapy sessions, so we'll see how that goes.